Tu credis, quoniam unis is Deus, bene facis is daimones credunt, et contrarium escunt. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host Liam, aka Himvar, and today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Christopher Ruocchio's Disquiet Gods. Disquiet Gods is a 2024 novel by Christopher Ruocchio and book 6 in the Sun Eater. You'll want to start with Empire of Silence, which is the first review I ever did on this channel, and I've reviewed all the previous books as well. And this is, of course, the story of Hadrian Marlowe, told in the first person as previously. He has been on exile on Jad for 200 years. He is now over 600 years old, and he has a daughter named Cassandra, but he still broods over his late wife, Volca. He is recalled from exile when a Watcher is discovered, essentially a Lovecraftian being, or at least that's the idea at the start. And Hapsis, of course, has need of him. This involves an old oath of his to the Emperor. The opening chapter goes at a normal Ruocchio pace, which means it could be faster, but it is gripping from the start. This pace means you're being well immersed into Hadrian's head and thought processes as we read his memoir. And it's a nice place to be. It's reminiscent of classics and capital C classics. You'll recognize some things that influence this highly conservative, ultra-conservative, almost LARPing future, but an understanding of past and ritual that some sci-fi writers forget. In particular, many are religious, and they don't seem to see that as a sign of naive apes from the past. It's very human to believe in a higher power, though no, not everyone does, of course, and this higher power takes many, many different forms. In fact, they're pretty well on display in this book. While the story deals with quantum entanglement and looks at philosophy and it recognizes itself also as a pulp story in some ways, or at least like the pulp stories of old. There's some also nice Easter eggs and jokes. There's always at least some nice stuff to find for many different types of fans, I'm sure. But ideas of, killing yourself and Goethe come into this one. There's hints of Christian myth. They've always been in the evidence earlier in the series. And it continues here a la Book of the New Sun or Tolkien's Legendarium, a little bit, I guess, of Lewis's Cosmic Trilogy as well. I say it's more with Tolkien and Wolfe than Lewis, though, which is to say it's not overt, but it is there and maybe a bit more obvious than it's been in previous entries. And this is really just one more revelation that's been happening. These revelations have been happening throughout. And it doesn't really split from what's been going on the whole series. It is still in line and enjoyable. The prose is as nice as ever. I'm very used to it at this point. Right? It reads like a Ruocchio book, which is a good thing in this case. This does feel a bit, I guess, more story-wise, feels a bit more like a mix of Demon in White and Howling Dark in many ways. So I think a lot of fans of those books will enjoy this one a lot. Not my favorite book still of the series. I would probably still stick with Kingdoms of Death, and then after that, Empire of Silence, but I guess I'm an odd one. Cassandra herself is an interesting character. She's young like Hadrian once was. She's very much not Hadrian. We also don't get as much of her as we did of Hadrian. Of course, this is not her story in some ways. It is, though, of course, too. She's a better swordsman than Hadrian was at the age of 40, and having trained to be a Mascalos on Jad. She's somewhat like Volca, but also in a very different role than Volca was as well. And, not Volca. And it's not required reading, but Daughter of Swords is a good short story to get to know her, I'd say. Edward is a new character as well. You may recognize his name, at least, not the character, from The Lesser Devil, if you've read that. He's a character I kind of wish we got to know better. The focus is certainly on plot, or when others are not directly in front of Hadrian, it's basically they're not the focus, right? So you get good character development when it matters to Hadrian's story. But otherwise, maybe not. But there's a lot of minor characters in this story. There's some old faces that return, friend and foe. I won't really spoil any of them besides the fact that I'll mention Selene, because I like her. But this is a military space opera, though Hadrian is a scarred veteran now. It's also something else. It's very much its own thing, right? Like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of pulpy, philosophical, ultra-conservative, but not saying that that's what is good also, right? In some ways, Hadrian is not, right? He still has some of his melodrama and fire, but the man, again, once seen as largely progressive amidst the ultra-conservative empire, is in some ways kind of used to his role now. He's a little, well, he's an old man almost. And so he does what he must, right? He's not as fiery about some things. And the conflict here gets bigger. And so he's still in a role, in some ways, kind of put back into a role that you see him in Empire of Silence, but I can't really say much why, because he's also in a role he's in Howling Dark and Demon in White and Kingdoms of Death. So we've seen, I don't know, a lot. He does what he must, like I said, and the conflict gets bigger, and we've seen bits of this conflict since the start of the series, start of the saga. But some crap really hits the fan here, right? It is the penultimate novel. It's philosophical as always, with the pulp influences and references to many a thing. Tolkien is quoted directly and then acknowledged by name in this one, so that's cool to see. But there's no, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori here, right? It's better that you live and do so for something good. There are some certain elements to another genre I can't really say, but I really appreciate it, and they're nice and weird, to say the least. And some things that reminded me of Angel's Egg as well, if you've seen that animated film. The story also explores fate and the future, as well as mistakes of the past. And as in the past, Hadrian has awesome powers, but often others are in danger, and so he's not just some unstoppable superhero. Act 1 is good, but the following ones are better. It does end in a good place, but it kind of feels like a cliffhanger. So much happens, there isn't much of a denouement. It's also not a Lovecraftian terminal climax either, but it is, listener, an ending. You have the luxury of foresight. You know where this ends. I shall go on alone.